Hello and welcome to the first breakout session of the day. Plan for crisis, lead with confidence. I'm Chris Aeilts, sales engineer at SDN Communications. 2020 has been a pretty trying year so far. I think most of you would probably agree with me. Some of you have probably experienced what it means to turn an in-house workforce into a remote workforce, or some degree of that anyway. Maybe your challenges have been around solutions that allow you to meet the needs of your customers in completely new ways. A common thread is that you didn't know it was coming. In fact, it wasn't even a part of the executive team's 3, 5, 10, or 20-year plans. I'd like to spend our time on a deep dive into the thought process that I've seen at SDN, which have directly impacted our ability to respond to change. During our time together, we'll discuss the importance of playing out hypothetical situations. We'll look at how standard operations benefit from continual evaluation and projection, and how unprecedented worst-case scenarios can be approached with calm resolve. At SDN, tabletop exercises have been a normal part of business continuity and disaster recovery strategy for a few years now. It involves the executive team, directors, managers, and key personnel sitting down together to work through an imaginary but potentially very real crisis scenario.
So what is the most important thing that would have to be restored if everything were down?
Roles and reactions are discussed in this low-stress, hypothetical environment, allowing thoughtful evaluation of current readiness and actionable recommendations for improvement. In an SDN tabletop 2 years ago, one of the situations proposed was a citywide weather event in the form of destructive tornadoes. On September 10th of last year, that hypothetical situation became reality.
Tornado sirens sounding the alarm in Sioux Falls. At least 3 twisters touching down in the city, all EF2s. The one striking this hospital campus had winds up to 130 miles an hour.
On that day, SDN facilities didn't sustain the incredible damage that was brought about through the imaginary exercise, but we had discussed at length the community impact an event of that magnitude would bring. On September 11th, schools started 2 hours late, meaning that some parents would be delayed in getting to the office, not to mention the downed trees causing different traffic patterns and therefore longer commutes. This was expected for an event like this. Additionally, in March of the same year, we were able to use some of the knowledge gained in the exercise to put protective measures in place to safeguard SDN assets in potential danger from flooding in the area. Looking back on the tabletop, it's easy to see that the changes we made as a result would have been vital to our continued operation had SDN headquarters been one of the locations to sustain a direct hit. Things like building-to-building communications, not relying on the network, and identifying incident command structure ensure a unified approach to disaster response. Our efforts to mitigate the effects of a major weather event included prepping SDN facilities in other geographic locations to handle an influx of staff in the event a building is taken out of service. Our core network already was designed with failover between primary data centers, but other auxiliary systems were identified and redundant services were built at secondary locations. Fire and shelter-in-place drills increased in frequency, and first aid kits received more attention. Analog phone lines were connected at designated shelter locations as an additional method to reach emergency services, and key personnel were identified and trained to be able to shut off power and gas to each building. To be sure, it is completely impractical to operate on a daily basis like every bad thing that could happen will. The key is to examine your readiness in light of likely threats and take practical and reasonable steps to protect against it or mitigate the threat's effect. Let's go now to the polling section of this webinar window and answer the first question. I'm looking for your feedback on how prepared you feel your organization would be for a major weather event, causing damage to your business's physical facilities. Thanks for participating in the poll. Just 4 weeks after the tornadoes that hit Sioux Falls, SDN held our 2019 tabletop exercises. Guess what the hypothetical crisis was that we worked through that day? Yep, murder hornets. No, not an infestation. No, we talked through a pandemic.
What is your plan should your critical expertise or critical staff not be
We're
available?
primarily support group, so it's going to be us supporting others. We've got 5 healthy people, we got 2 healthy people.
And you're throwing them in,
We're
so
throwing them in.
they're in the pool.
We're throwing them into the group and trying to concentrate on how do we keep our healthy people healthy? You know, they keep dropping off.
Yeah.
The other question comes, well, we're 3 or 4 days into this. People that got sick 3 days ago should be starting to come around a little bit.
That's going to depend on what it is. Some of them actually take longer, but you're onto something there. There is a cycle to this type of thing. The question is at what point? And then, can you get sick twice?
We discussed what our response would be to a global flu-like virus, first attacking a few of our critical function workers and spreading to others, and where we would make certain decisions that could curb the transmission and what technology would allow us to do remotely. We discussed the tail end of the global event and what it would look like for senior management to give an all clear. In reality, we are still navigating the middle section of that scenario that began as we moved through February into March of 2020. Once again, talking through the imaginary crisis would prove to be the most valuable preparation when the hypothetical became reality. The strategies developed during the exercise focused on, first, communications technology, second, cross-training resources, and third, identifying trigger points for moving between stages of isolation. The trigger points were really the first strategic contribution recognizable, and it came in the form of communication from senior management that they were in constant communication with state and local officials monitoring the situation and messaging to prepare for the possibility of working remotely. When we encountered that point, we realized the benefits of communications technology strategy changes that had allowed our remote workers to work from home for extended periods of time. That came in the form of a new phone system that had been implemented at the start of the year that allowed for soft phones on mobile devices and computers, so that anywhere you were, with whatever device you had, your business number would ring through without complex call routing. A support effort undertaken was the elimination of desktop computers. The whole SDN workforce had completely moved away from desktop computers and were able to pick up their laptops and work from home. And lastly, the adoption of cloud-connected applications like Office 365, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams allowed a version of collaboration close to that of being in the office together. Let's go again to the polling section of this webinar window and answer the second question. How prepared do you feel your organization was for this pandemic? Did you have a pandemic plan in writing and systems in place to support it? Did you take readiness steps that would support the operation in a pandemic, but not put procedures in place? Did you have a discussion at some point where improvements were identified, but nothing resulted? Did you not really communicate any kind of strategy or any steps taken? With the kind of record that SDN has in guessing the next big crisis, you can bet I'm interested to learn what our next tabletop exercise will be. Now, in both of the tabletop exercises, the keys to successful implementation of worthwhile measures were due to 3 things. First, scenarios designed around likely threats. South Dakota has on average 36 tornadoes every year. We are not strangers to this threat. Every few years, we deal with an epidemic or pandemic. We aren't always directly affected, but we are certainly aware of the risk through the national news media. And second, the tabletop included the executive team and representation from all functional groups. So there was buy-in from the top level and a broad scope of input. And third, the action plan was full of reasonable steps. If it's not easy enough to implement, steps of protection often get set aside for a more immediate need of the business. Try not to propose building a self-sustaining bunker city for your employees. That may seem like the only option at some point, but you'll lose executive buy-in pretty quickly. Now, that was all about crisis and the worst of the big, bad, scary things. How does everyday planning aid in a crisis? One word: structure. You build the structure that will function for day-to-day operations, as well as the worst-case scenarios. At the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, leadership within SDN was asking questions like, is our network ready to support the shift we see coming in how businesses operate? The answer came back quickly, and it was a yes. Operations kept busy processing bandwidth increase requests, and managed services created over 600 new VPN logins for managed firewall customers, and the core network took it with ease. Our engineering group has a process that runs at a set frequency to identify upcoming bandwidth needs throughout our network and our connectivity to other networks worldwide. Part of that process identifies the need and then builds in overhead to avoid any situations that might otherwise take us by surprise. That meant that we didn't need to restructure or upgrade our network to handle the changes, because good planning had already prepared the infrastructure for those changes. Looking back at those early days of the pandemic, we can see that internet utilization was topping the typical 30% growth year over year that we'd expect, coming in at 40% growth in Q1 of 2020. Through Q2, where we would normally see a dip, there was a 10% increase, an average of 15% higher than normal for just that quarter. Now, you may be thinking, sure, an additional 10 to 25% growth in my company over a period of months would be record-setting, but it wouldn't be impossible to handle. Changes in how we have to operate would be a much bigger impact. How does evaluation and projection help in those situations? At the very base level, it allows you to view the components of the multiple systems that make up your business. That visibility and familiarity gained with shooting for your projection allows you greater insight into the connectedness of those components and systems. Given any new challenge, your understanding gives you a solid platform to make good decisions. Decisions that are made to reach the intended outcome, that factor in the unique blend of the technologies you employ. One more time, let's go to the polling section of the window and answer the third question. What kind of increase in workload was put on your teams or your networks over the past year? Was it a 100% increase? Maybe only a 20% increase? Maybe there was no increase at all, just different kinds of things. Maybe there was no change at all. Maybe you were largely unaffected. Or maybe there was a reduction. Welcome back. Mobile operators have been doing this for many years now. The capacity available on their networks directly influences a customer's buying decisions. So evaluation and projection of needs at individual towers has been going on for quite some time. Operators that previously had bandwidths of 150, 250, and topping out at 500 megabits per second have now opted for 1 gigabit per second everywhere on our network. Their view of the future of utilization has dramatically increased. It's not hard to see why. Working remotely doesn't just mean connecting to your internet at home. Ubiquitous 4G LTE from all wireless carriers has allowed solid remote connectivity wherever you have a cellular signal. Business tools on mobile platforms has allowed functions previously driven from a desktop to operate in your hand wherever you are. I have a colleague who spent half a day working from her car in the driveway because home internet service went out and she had Wi-Fi in her vehicle, connected to 4G LTE. More devices, more data being generated from more devices, and methods of communication that use more data are driving mobile operators to plan for higher throughput. Increases on existing networks is a primary change over the past year. But another effort to drive data to more places is the ReConnect grant from the USDA and SDN's own contributions. In 2019, through a ReConnect grant, 45 miles of fiber were approved to connect 3 rural communities.
It's a $3.3 million high-speed broadband in South Dakota, benefiting about 275 people in that area. But I'm really proud of our rural communities that are continuing to work day in and day out to participate in this economy and expanding access to this critical infrastructure to help ensure that rural America makes it through this pandemic and then continues to prosper.
Another ReConnect grant was won in 2020, and through it, we will focus on bringing 40 miles of fiber to underserved and rural areas of Pennington and Lawrence counties.
We're putting in $6 million of federal grant money into this project, but more importantly, they have skin in the game as well. They're putting forward about $2 million into this project to be able to serve about just short of 1,200 people, a little over 480 households, about 16 businesses, I believe, and it says 3 farms, but I'm tempted to think they probably mean ranches here. So it's, yeah, I'm not sure everyone understands exactly the difference, but I sure do. I know that the President and the Secretary, Sonny Perdue, are extremely committed to rural America. You witnessed that. We've been doing a lot of these announcements throughout the United States, and this is something in every community. It means the world.
Connect South Dakota is another effort, co-funded by the state and the broadband industry. It connected 4,800 households and over 100 businesses in 2019 alone. By the end of 2020, it will have connected an additional 3,700 households and 295 businesses. Anticipation and participation in these kinds of projects keeps the components of the network building machine well-oiled and ready for unplanned projects to bring communities back online when struck by disaster. Now, we've talked about how planning for a crisis can improve our response, and even the simple actions of planning and taking steps forward can bring about a calm resolve if the hypothetical becomes reality. Typical operational evaluation and projection can prepare your systems to handle unexpected challenges if you're intentional about it. Know your systems and approach the challenge with confidence. And rest assured, as soon as I hear what the SDN 2021 tabletop exercise will be, I'll let everyone know so you can begin your crisis planning process. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you have any questions, I'll be in the chat section of this session until it has closed out. Otherwise, grab another cup of coffee before the next session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium.